Good evening. I think we've got another hard act to follow, though not as hard as the hats that one evening. I'm still a little traumatized by that, but that was a great presentation, super interesting and also really relevant to the conversation we're having tonight. So perfect timing. So we are here tonight to talk about some zoning code and design standards. We've been promising you this for a while, so we're finally here with some good information. I'm joined today by Cheney Skadson, Senior Planner, and Ian Crozier and Bob Bedford from our consultant makers. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Bob and Ian for the presentation, and we will all be available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz, and good evening, Mayor, City Council members. Wanted to provide just a little bit of background on the zoning work. The draft zoning and design standards were initially prepared for the Ambaum and Boulevard Park community plans. And later with the work on the comprehensive plan, we expanded that to cover the urban center, downtown urban center, plus the citywide multifamily and commercial areas in the comprehensive plan update. So the goals for the whole project are to reduce barriers to unwanted, to reduce barriers to desired development, increase housing capacity, especially near transit and near community amenities, to make the code easy to use for staff and for the development community and our decision makers, and also to emphasize form-based design codes to really get the type of development that the community desires. So Ian Crozier here is going to go into the zoning aspects at a higher level here.
Thank you, Bob. Yes, so we've got a new suite of zones we'll talk through with you all you'll notice mostly start with either MU or R. The MU stands for mixed use. The R stands for residential. There's a nice suite of zones that can be applied, multiple zones for the land use designations. You've been probably looking at the comprehensive plan land use maps, which have pretty high level categories, and then these have more finer grained categories that can be applied as appropriate given different areas. There's the most capacious zones. The zones that allow the biggest buildings are in the urban center, as probably makes sense. There's also been an effort both through the Ambaum Boulevard Park planning process and then also subsequently through the comprehensive plan process to focus on the areas with the best transit access, which is primarily Ambaum Boulevard, but also First Avenue, and then the urban center have good transit service. And then there's also an interest in looking at small neighborhood nodes or mixed use nodes in different areas of the city, building on what's already there to some extent, and also looking at just sort of geographic proximity. Okay, this is sort of spreading some neighborhood centers out throughout the city in areas that make sense. You'll notice there's numbers. There's the R4 and the R5, but there's no R1, 2, 3. And so those zones will be developed in the near future, addressing the middle housing compliance that you've probably heard about, HB 1110. Those are due by June of next year. So that'll come again soon. There's also, you'll notice there's the other gray areas on the map include the industrial zones, the existing industrial zones, which are not being updated as part of this process. And there's a small zone next to Lake Burien called SBA 2 at the Ruth Weichman Center. That's not being updated at this time either. The other big update, or another piece of the zoning code update is streamlining the parking standards. And trying to just have more consistency throughout that. Okay. Starting off with, you got the residential medium zones. These are the two zones that implement that residential medium comprehensive plan designation. You've got the R5 mid-rise buildings, the R4 low-rise buildings, low-rise generally referring to like 3 to 4 stories. Oh my goodness, wow, okay. I was like, that's a powerful,
Mr. Mayor, if I may, pardon the interruption, I just
please.
wanted to remind council that if the power is to go out, that the meeting itself would essentially pause. It would continue at a later date, so just wanted to remind everyone that that is the plan. That has happened before.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
That'd be a first for us. Okay, so yeah, so mid-rise referring to buildings generally like your Burien Town Center, kind of 5 up to 8 stories, and low-rise buildings generally being the 3 to 4 stories. Important to note also that there are some provisions for mixed-use buildings in these zones. They would allow up to 2,000 square feet of certain uses on the ground floor of mixed-use buildings. And with limitations on the kinds of business uses and also on the hours of operations. Also worth noting, okay, so I said 3 to 4 stories, so that there's a height bonus for buildings that include some affordable housing. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Also worth noting a component of multifamily zones that has been really common in recent decades is the density per acre standard. How many dwelling units per acre? And that's still something you see a lot, but it's something that a lot of cities are transitioning away from, partly because form-based controls, as Bob said, are sort of a more precise tool to get to what you want. We're saying the height, the setbacks, the parking, the impervious, the open space, okay, and then the rest of it, we don't care if it's a bunch of studios or a bunch of 3-bedroom units. We want we're going to control the building, and we're going to leave it up to the developer to decide how many dwelling units are going to be fit in that acre or that parcel. And then the other part of it is just as with the state has been passing a lot of laws about saying how many units per lot. It just has really scrambled the whole notion of doing units per acre. So it makes sense to move away from it for that reason too. We've also got the mixed-use family of zones, and these are spread out over 2 slides because there's more of them. But generally they fall into 2. Well, they've got the families of zones. We got the mixed-use 1, which is a sort of your low-rise again. This one goes from I think 3 to 5 stories, but is a much more flexible zone in terms of the uses allowed: residential, commercial, and a mix of those. There's a variant of that called Mixed Use 1 Boulevard Park, which de-emphasizes residential uses and is oriented more towards uses that are appropriate where there's more of the flight path impact. We've also got the MU2 zone, which is your mid-rise residential commercial mixed-use zone. Very flexible. Really, this came out of thinking especially about rapid ride H and have that sort of TOD zone that you want to have in your really high potential locations. There's again a variant of that is oriented towards employment, MU2E. Also another one that's oriented towards the creative district, MU2CD. One note is there's an exception to the super use flexibility where their residential uses are not, so just residences, are not allowed on the ground floor in certain targeted locations where you want to have the active ground floor, a business or even a gym like we have across the street over at Town Hall. Again, because thinking about those high priority TOD locations, you want to have some restriction on what's allowed on the ground floor, but those are very targeted so that you're not over applying them too broadly and ending up with expensive vacant ground floors. We've also got these other 3 mixed use zones: MU-DT, MU-A, MU-C. These are zones that are especially the first 2 are primarily located in the urban center. The MU-DT is covering your downtown core. MU-A is for arterial. That's the along First Avenue. More flexible, both in terms of height and in the broader range of commercial uses, including some of the heavier ones like big box stores and things like that. And then the MUC is one that's came out of the Ambaum Park Boulevard Ambaum Boulevard and Boulevard Park community planning process, where there's a developer agreement process where you get allowed to do low-rise development outright, but there's a couple of really sites with a lot of potential to make special things happen in the community, where not all sites are the same. So there we want to say with the developer agreement, there's an opportunity to go higher, to work with the community to provide some open space or a connection or things like that. Internal gathering space. With all these zones, or with most of the zones, there are opportunities to build a little higher, to go from 3 stories to 4 or 5 stories to 7. And it depends on the zone. There's different community benefits that are most relevant to that zone and in that general kind of location where the zone is applied. Affordable housing, I see 5 of the different zones offer a bonus for affordable housing. Employment uses, which is office but it could be other employment uses, or even a mixed use building, gets a height bonus in the MU1 and 2 zones, help you get those job targets for the comprehensive plan. Hotel has been a long desired use business type here in Burien, so there's a bonus for that in the downtown oriented mixed use zones. And then finally, that development agreement in the MUC zone that I mentioned. The affordable housing height bonus depends a little bit on which zone, but in all of them, it's it's tied to the bonus floor area. So 20% of the bonus floor area, you get 1 story, it's 20% of the 1 story. You do 2 stories, it's 20% of the 2 stories. Again, that depends on the zone. Then also there's an interaction with your MFTE program, which I think you all have been hearing about as well, which provides some affordable housing. So the idea here is you're doing both the MFTE, the 12-year MFTE that has the affordable housing component, and using the height bonus. It's as a 70% AMI for 50 years, and if it's in that 20% of the bonus area units, and if you're just using the height bonus and not the MFTE program, then it's the 80% AMI threshold. A lot of numbers, it's complicated, and happy to talk more about that. And pass it back to Bob for the design standards overview.
All right, so we initially prepared a set of design standards for Ambaum Boulevard Park Community Plan in that planning area. We then updated those with the comprehensive planning process to again apply to the citywide, the R4 and R5 and all of the mixed use zones. This would exclude the old Burien design standards, which I actually had the benefit of working on 20 years ago and helped creating, and know that that is very specific to that area and probably want to leave that alone. So the emphasis, a big emphasis of the design standards is on the ground floor, really what we call the block frontages. So you'll see, if you look through the design standards, you'll see big sections on the block frontages, including the pedestrian-oriented streets, that image you see on the right on your screen, or the landscape frontages you'll see with the photograph there on the right. The design standards also get into things like through block connections, many of which are applied to the Ambaum Boulevard Park planning area, and also implement some of the downtown plan through block connections that are already been discussed in your streetscape plan for downtown. Some other stuff includes pedestrian circulation standards, usable open space standards, mostly for residential multifamily development, but also in some limited cases for commercial, and some building design standards that cover massing techniques, building details, and some elements on materials. So Ian's got a couple more slides here.
Just 2 more slides on just a little bit more detailed things, but that we think that's important that you see. The first, these are about overlays that go on top of the zoning map. One is, there's three different things happening on the map in this slide. We've got, first of all, the old Burien. So that's just to let you know, that's where that is. But then there's, so the limited height overlay, around, it's sort of south of 152nd and both sides of 153rd. So that stacks on top of the very flexible downtown zone. But it's sort of just recognizes that there's, you got a really special fine-grained small business retail environment in there currently, and it's de-emphasizes that area for redevelopment. Then there's a 45-degree sort of step back from 152nd for about 2 blocks there between 8th and 4th on the north side of 152nd, which is similar to what you have in the currently in the urban center code. The idea sort of comes back like this. You can build higher, further away from the street, less high, closer to the street, and it's part of that Main Street vibe that you have, that Main Street character here on 152nd. That's quite lovely. Also, there's the air and noise impact overlay, and this is new. It's coming partly out of the Ambaum Boulevard park work, looking at how the first of all, the flight path does have a pretty big impact, especially on Boulevard Park, especially on a certain part of Boulevard Park, and thinking critically about what kinds of uses make the most sense in those areas, and what strategies do exist to mitigate the harms. So it's got two parts. One is it prohibits new uses that primarily serve sensitive populations, which are children and the elderly. So daycares and assisted living facilities, for instance, would be new ones would not be allowed in those purple areas. And then also requires air quality and noise. You've got your noise stuff is already covered in your existing code, but the air quality mitigation measures for new residential development over 3 stories in these purple areas. The freeways. So the Ambaum Boulevard Park Plan, we're looking at the flight path really closely. The freeways is something that came as we were looking at the comprehensive plan, was really clear thing, and something that we've been looking at in other communities on the sound. And as we learn more and more about the health impacts from close proximity to those air and noise pollution sources. And so that's the last slide. So we're available for questions.
Any questions?
Yes, please.
I have a few. Oh. Okay. You mentioned parking. You didn't talk about parking. Liz and Cheney know my personal opinions about parking policy. But I'm happy to share what I'd like to see, and I know I might not, just from my perspective, but I'm curious what you're going to be proposing to us for parking.
Yes, yeah, we had a slide, and it became a talking point, and a short one at that. First thought, there's a couple of state laws that we have to comply with in terms of proximity to frequent transit. So that's one part of the change. But the overall standards are generally reducing a lot of the requirements. There's sort of the big one is for residential, go down to 1 parking space per dwelling unit, down from 2, I believe. You have pretty complicated parking standards currently.
In which areas?
Citywide.
Okay. That would include multifamily?
Yes.
See, this is where my radicalism about parking comes in, because I don't think that's a good idea.
Okay.
I want to minimize parking requirements so that we can build more density without requiring parking, especially around transit-oriented development. It's unnecessary, and if we're trying to be a community that gets people onto public transit, there's no reason for parking requirements for multifamily dense development, especially if we're talking about dwelling units. So if you have a 2-bedroom apartment, you'd still be requiring 2 parking stalls. And I think if we're talking about transit-oriented development, we shouldn't be requiring that. I don't know what the state law is, so maybe you can help me understand what the state law is for that. But my personal general opinion on parking policy is the least requirements for parking, the better, because I'd like to see more development and more housing go up and not more parking. We don't need more parking. We need more housing. And especially if it's near transit or if it's near transit.
So Mayor Schilling, I'll begin to address it and then I'll open it up for anyone else on the team. But we have heard that, and what we have recognized is that we do have minimums in the code, but we also have an authority for the director to modify those minimums. So that in those circumstances where there is great public transit and the developers coming to us and saying, look, we're doing this parking study, we know what we need, we do have the ability to modify. And that was very important to me as well, because I don't think all developments are created equal. But we also recognize that there are many parts of the city where people do still want to have their vehicles and to move in that way. So that gave us the flexibility to try and meet all of those needs. We also put in more robust bicycle parking as well as another way to start to move people out of cars all the time and provide some other flexibility.
You know, because I want us to create as walkable a community as possible, a less car-dependent community, but also recognize that parking is a cost barrier to dense development. And we have plenty of parking. And I think we need to make sure that we're focusing on incentivizing what we need the most of.
Absolutely. And I will assure you, this code does take it back quite a bit from where we started and then puts in that flexibility as well. So I hope we've hit the sweet spot on this one.
Okay. I'll be looking. Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments to the team here? Go ahead, Councilmember Ake.
I'm just gonna chime in on the parking. We happen to have 3 cars. My husband's in construction. He has a work car. I have my car. He has his car. And we live in a condo. And if we didn't have our 3 parking spots, there is going to be a problem. So I understand families that need to have multiple cars. I guess it would mean that I would have to get rid of my car in order to live here, which would be a problem because I can't drive my husband's car. It's too big for me. So that piece of it, like, I understand what you're trying to say. I recognize that. And at the same time, I recognize that there are individual family needs. You know, it wouldn't be the same, you know, my husband has a work vehicle in addition to our personal vehicles, you know, and so I understand what Mayor Schilling is trying to say, and at the same time, I recognize that there are individual needs that families might have, even in these higher density populations. So I just want to throw in my 2 cents on parking.
Councilmember Andrade?
I will add my 2 cents as well, just because I do look forward to hearing what that sweet spot is, seeing what that sweet spot is, because I've been there as a family when you have 4 kids, 2 have to go one place, the other 2 have to go another place, but having to worry about parking situation with a lessened parking situation would not be something that's ideal. But I look forward to what the sweet spot is that you will be presenting.
I can address just briefly a little bit on that. Because all of these, if there is a change to the minimum, the developer does have to do an analysis and a study. So they really are trying to determine who is their target audience and what is their need for that target audience, and determine, because really they don't want to build it if they can't rent it or lease it or sell it. There is a market component to all of this. So while we have decreased it for those projects where it makes a lot of sense, there's no requirement that you have to go to that minimum. You can actually go maximum or more. There isn't a maximum. You can go more if that is the desire of that development community and the people they are trying to sell to. But there is that ability to go less for those communities and those developments where it really makes a lot of sense. So some of the ones the mayor mentioned where you have great transit and, you've got accessibility. So and that's where I think we were trying to hit what I called the sweet spot of providing that flexibility for all of these different needs.
Councilmember Moore?
I don't have much to say about parking. I had, I'm the outlier. I had a question about the last slide, about the noise mitigation thing. It just, I don't know if there's an action related to it, but you have these two purple bands of noise mitigation and then what looked like maybe one or at most 2 streets worth of not in the noise mitigation area. And it was 8th Avenue and probably, I'm guessing 10th Avenue. And I'm wondering if there is an impact on those 2 streets, which living there, the noise is there as well in both, and in the case of 8th Avenue in particular, there's noise in both directions and a lot of traffic. And so I'm concerned if there's a benefit to being in a noise mitigation area that those 2 streets may be missing out.
This does not identify a benefit. This identifies stricter standards, thinking about your zoning as your tool for where we send different uses, and what kind of guardrails we put on around how those uses get built. And like parking is an example, okay, we want to have this residential development, okay, but we also want to have this much parking, or maybe we don't. And so, yes, this is looking at, okay, given that we know about freeways and about the flight path, we want to have some more extra guardrails about what does get built there. So it's going to probably add cost for those developments. And then also there's certain kind of things that we just really don't want to have in those most impacted areas. And I think you were mentioning that sort of, that area that is left out of the overlay is definitely, there is noise impact. We were using the 65 day night level decibel thing, sort of a composite measure that comes from the Port of Seattle, that that they use to look at port packages. I think what they have them called for the retrofits and everything. And so since that was a contour that is out there, it's maintained, that was seemed a reasonable place to draw the line. But it doesn't say that there's no noise impact on the other side of the line. There's it's obviously it's something that's a gradient. Yeah.
Just wanted to point out, Councilmember Moore, this was informed by the environmental impact study that was done. And so all of this noise mitigation that we've built into these design standards apply because of that work that was done. So it informed these codes, and those were the areas that were the most impacted and thus had an additional layer on top of regular building code standards and the regular design standards.
I have another question. Could we pull up the slide on design standards and design requirements? I don't know who can do that.
Give us one moment, please.
And then also, was the slide about the height levels in downtown before or after that slide? I think it was after. Okay, then we'll start with design. I have another heterodox opinion about design standards. I think my general concern about design standards and what we put in place is that, and just tell me if you've heard this at all from either developers here or developers in other jurisdictions. But my general concern is that design standards, again, kind of restrict the speed at which we can build more housing. Because if you're a developer that wants to develop in the city of Burien, but you have to do every single design standard, unlike just being able to build a 9-story multifamily rental without the design standards, and however you want to do that. Are we focusing on design standards because we want there to be a conformity of look and appeal? Or are we focusing on design standards because we want to incentivize a cost efficiency and a quickness to construction?
I can take that. So this is something I've been working on for 25 plus years, including starting with the downtown design standards and Old Burien. But it's something that we've always been conscious of cost and speed, working with the development community of putting together. Our goal has always been to try to use prescriptive, easy to understand standards that don't add a lot of cost and people can understand, but also help to encourage the good, prevent the worst, and really stick to standards that are critical to the community and doing away with things that aren't. So you'll see a lot of purpose statements in the design standards, trying to prevent blank walls. I mean, we've all seen buildings that went in that may have changed a neighborhood for the better, and may have another buildings that are like, wow, I really don't like that building. That really kind of messes up the character of the street. And seen it all over the place. I've seen it in my community. So this is trying to promote the good, like I said, and prevent the bad. The other parts are, you've got House Bill 12, now I'm forgetting the number, 1293, of which I just a couple days ago presented a conference session on some of the impacts.
What was that bill?
House Bill 1293 is on design review and basically tries to streamline the development review process and make sure that you have design standards, objective design standards, rather than subjective design guidelines, to make sure that they're clear and objective, and that your process is more on the administrative side, and that you only have no more than one public meeting, and you already have an administrative design review process. So you already meet that. But one of the things that we did when we were looking at creating new design standards is that they met this objective design standards requirement. And a part of that is the design standards that we were proposing here consolidate and become citywide design standards, except for Old Burien, which we left alone.
Sure.
But we basically looked at your downtown design standards. We kind of reworked them because they're 20 plus years old. And we've learned a lot over those 20 years, and construction practices have changed. So we made sure that the new design standards meet the requirements of House Bill 1293. And also we've tried to ensure that the standards, like there's articulation and massing standards. We provide a toolbox that looks at, here's a list of things, do at least 3 of these features and you'll meet the standards. So it's very prescriptive, but it also allows the architect and the applicant some choices in how they meet a standard. That allows them to look at their creativity and how they do it, but also helps them look at cost control. And so in our role is trying to look at those and say, well, is 3 enough? Does that help us get to where we want to go from a design objective standpoint, but also does it help control cost in the way we structure those and structure the choices? So we put 25 years of work together and how we structure these, and then in this project, we're also structuring and crafting this to make sure it works for Burien. Does it work for Ambaum? Does it work for Boulevard Park? Does it work for downtown? We're kind of taking all of that into account in how we craft these. So at the end of the day, I think that there's enough options and choice there that allows creativity. There's also enough in there that helps you not going crazy on costly measures.
Sure.
You know, we're not requiring, for the most part, not requiring modulation. You know, you could have a square building and you could do other stuff to help meet some of your massing and articulation provisions. When you take a look and you zoom into those details, you'll find that there's choices there that don't necessarily mean you got to go in 30 and out 30.
Mm-hmm.
In many cases, those are options, but they're not requirements.
Was that bill in the same suite of bills as 1110 and 1220? The year of housing, was it in the year of housing?
I think it comes from the same caucus in the legislature.
Yeah,
Okay, 1293? Is that what you said the number
from
was?
1110, yeah, but I'm not sure they were.
But it was 1293?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna look that up. I mean, one thing that I think is interesting about Burien is that we can clearly see which buildings were built and designed prior to incorporation and which are post incorporation. And I think that gives a little bit of a uniqueness to the city, but can we go to the next slide? Which is on the height standards, I think. Yeah. So, okay, so help me understand your graph here. So you're saying within the 152nd and 153rd corridor that, help me understand a little bit what the slanted lines are saying. You're saying throughout that entire blocked radius.
Yes, so the slanted lines, right, it's, yeah, not as clear in the legend there as it probably could be, is that that's just a 3-story limit. And then-
3-story, okay, okay. And then in the dots, starting at 45 feet. So like you said, you want to keep the
Right.
front part of it. Yeah, okay, all right. So those slanted, like the 3-story limit.
Mhm.
Do we have any 3-story? I think there's 2 buildings in that corridor that are 3 stories right now. I know the Remax is 2, this one right over here.
That's right, that was one of the things the planning commission pointed out. We were, and we were discussing this area, was even just the 2-story building really stands out quite notably.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah, because I'd like to see, I don't know what we can do within the comp plan to incentivize more work to be done to grow the general core up to 2 or 3 stories, incentivize developers, incentivize property owners to do that. I think that's important for the core here and activity in the downtown core. But I'm interested in ensuring that we include whatever we can to incentivize owners and developers to work towards higher growth in the downtown core.
I think some of this new zoning code will do that. And then certainly there's further work we can do with economic development as well to continue that trend and look, are there certain incentives that, you know, after we do some analysis, are there certain things that you want to add in? But it was Planning Commission's direction. They were very clear to keep it at that 3-story level in those areas to try and really maintain the character of, you know, the basic structure of what's there today. So, or what is allowed.
And would anything on the 2nd or 3rd story be able to be residential? Or you're doing it entirely retail and commercial?
It would be.
It would be? Okay.
It would be, yeah.
Councilmember Moore.
I wanted to, maybe I'll be able to weave parking into this one. I did want to say, I really appreciate the neighborhood hub design that's been built into the plan. I think that I think that that is a way to build walkability in, especially if we prioritize making neighborhoods more walkable from that hub out. I live in a neighborhood that is, I would say, not it's not walkable in the standard senses of not having sidewalks. It doesn't have, it has a lot of hills that are steeper than one would want for, for mobility reasons. But I think having the most walkability leading towards places that are gathering points for community is probably going to make our city more of a walkable area.
On 153rd, one of the things that has come up in comments in the past is the aestheticness of 153rd with the large setbacks due to the parking considerations that are there. And I think the businesses appreciate having all of that parking. And at the same time, it's also been an interesting sort of place for walkability or seeing the businesses, or what kind of changes would this plan have towards that, or would there be any change along 153rd?
I can go ahead and start and I'll invite anybody else to join in. You're right, that's a challenge when you have a really wide street escape. It's challenging for the pedestrian. This plan does not address that. This plan assumes that the right-of-way maintains the same width and continues on. That doesn't mean that in future planning initiatives, that couldn't be something, and that would be a conversation also with our public works group and try and think about what are other ways we could utilize that width that the city owns today in the right-of-way. So I think it's it's a good thing to kind of put on that docket of like, ooh, great idea. Let's think about that. But did you have an ad, Bob?
So when you get out of the right of way, beyond the sidewalk, the developers would have a choice of, they could build a storefront right at the back end of whatever the required sidewalk is. So they could make that change in the future, but they could only go up to 3 stories. But this was a good discussion topic with the planning commission, both the height issue and the design aspect. But for instance, we didn't designate 153rd as a pedestrian-oriented street, which would have required redevelopment to be at the edge of the sidewalk and would have required ground floor commercial. So we stopped there mostly because we kept that, they decided to go with the 3-story limit there. So a little background on kind of how we got there.
I just wanted to add one last thing for my thinking on what I think the downtown core can look like. I'm very nerdy on this and inspired by the Japanese urban design concept of zakyo, which is allowing for mixed use per floor. So you don't necessarily have to require the second floor be retail and the third floor be retail, but you can have housing on the third, retail on the second, housing on the first. There's no design requirement that holds an owner or developer to each floor being the same usage. And I think for what we want the vision to be of the downtown core, where we want mixed use, where we want business, but we also want residential, I think the more we can allow for that flexibility in the mixed use is the best thing we can do for an area that has had no development for a very long time. There's a really old picture of what downtown Burien looked like in like the 50s. It's hanging on the wall at Taco Time. And there's not much difference between what 153rd looked like in 1953 to what it looks like now. So let's all go on a field trip to the wall at Taco Time and look at the street. There's not much difference. And I'd like to see us allow for flexibility of mixed use to where we are having an energetic urban space, but we're not constraining the efforts of people who are wanting to build that fits their personal need, but they're still meeting the needs of the community at large. And the Japanese have figured that out, and I think we can learn a lot from how they design their small urban centers.
I think there's quite a bit of flexibility in this code.
Great.
There are some areas where it would be not allowed to have residential at the first floor. And that's simply so that you have that activated streetscape, so you can build the community and create a safe space for people that are also walking down the sidewalk, not wanting to have things closed off and so on. But apart from that, it's generally more about how the building is constructed and what dimensions are needed for retail, or what dimensions are needed for residential, or what dimensions are needed for an office space, that really tend to drive most of those decisions. But I think it's really just the retail at the grade level that is mainly what you'll see in terms of any requirements around use.
And that's fine as long as we can allow for.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
I think, Mayor Schilling, you find this interesting, but one of the things when we say streamlining the parking standards is that currently you have like and this is very common, you have like lots of different numerical standards for different kinds of businesses. Your bowling alley is this, your hamburger restaurant is that, your bank is this. And what that makes is it's very hard to change use. And so if, to say that this Japanese model is going to happen here, but if it were, one of the things you might run into is the property owner or developer would have to figure out exactly what the different kind of businesses were going to be in order to provide exactly the right amount of parking. But the proposed standards are very consistent. They're lower than currently in many cases, but they're much more consistent across commercial categories. So it allows that change of use from one kind of business to another business over the course of the life of the building.
I could talk more about this for a while, but I don't think we need to, and I could take it offline. I think that there's some more discussion points around this specific corridor, especially around business and parking, that I want us to have a deeper conversation on before we approve anything. But for the sake of time, I'll take it offline with
Mayor
y'all
Schilling,
there. Yeah.
there are two council members on Zoom.
Oh, they
who
have their
have
hands up. Okay. Councilmember Garcia, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, staff, for the presentation. This is really helpful, and thanks to the Planning Commission. I know it's been a long process. I just want to start by preface my comments and questions by just reiterating that we are in the midst of a housing crisis. So we are catching up on 20 to 30 plus years since we incorporated, years of under planning and underestimating the amount of people that have come to this area and will continue to come. So as I take that into consideration, finding that sweet balance is just resulted in this crisis. I'm very bullish on the parking, and very similar to our mayor. I think we need to get rid of parking in our downtown core within 2 to 3 blocks of that transit center. Because if you build it, they will come. If you build high density units that have transit, then there is no need for vehicles. And we just have to look at the hard truth that the longer we delay by finding sweet spots, the longer this housing crisis will take to be ended. Similarly with the 153rd, the reason it's the same since the 1950s is because of the three floor heights limit. It will not pencil out financially for developers to build more and bring out the landscape to the front of the lot without that 3 floor limit. So I think we should be more bullish about our housing goals. And in that slide where you had the thick line over Old Burien, where in essence, we're not touching this area. This area is going to stay very, old school with very limited change. I think that should be the only area. Everything else to the right of Old Burien, we need to be more bullish on the housing because it's just, we have to provide options for developers and property owners. If they don't have more options for less parking, for higher heights, they can't pencil out and they won't build. And that's exactly what has happened. No one has built. And we are in a crisis because we have a fixed amount of land and we can only go up. So we have to be more bullish. And so those are my comments. I think taking it offline makes sense, but I think we should take a look at what that looks like, because we're delaying our housing goals by not having those height limits increased now, which is the appropriate time when we're in the midst of a housing crisis. There is a building in just north of us on unincorporated White Center, about 2 blocks off First Avenue, 116th. It's the Latitude 112 building on 114th, and it is a affordable housing development. I believe it's Section 8, 200 units with mix with commercial on the first floor. And they built it in 2017, 18. It was finished, I think, being built in 2018, where the commercial units were very small to kind of provide more spaces for businesses in smaller footage. And they were deep, where someone could actually live and work in the same unit. So they would live in the back of the unit, work units, and then have the business in the front. I think we should look at making that a requirement for the 153rd and even Ambaum Boulevard, because that goes to the design that our mayor mentioned, the Japanese design, right? You have now people that live and have their business in that same first floor. And now instead of having just one big business, you can have 2, 3 smaller businesses in that same square footage. And that just goes towards us having to be more innovative. I don't want to use the word bullish because it might sound aggressive, but we have to do more, because we have to catch up on the last 30 years and what's coming, because data from the State Department of Commerce says it's going to continue to go at this place. You're going to have, one of the largest events in the world in 2 years that's going to bring a lot of eyes, and a lot of people are going to see how amazing it is to live here, and they're going to want to move here. So we just have to be aggressive. And I'm not saying that what we have presented is not enough. I think it's great. I think you've done a lot of work, a lot of staff hours. Our consultant has done great. Our planning commission has done great. But in my opinion, we have to be a little bit more innovative and kind of push the envelope more. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you very much for those, Councilmember Garcia. Councilmember Mata, you have your hand up?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much. Sorry I couldn't be in person. First of all, I want to thank the commission and obviously the presenters today. I go back to, I want to thank the mayor. He gave us a book about parking, right? And that's something that, went to a conference. And, what happens is when you build developments, they're very expensive. When you end up building high rises and you're having to include parking is very expensive. Concrete is very expensive. So for me, when you build housing, you're building housing in a community that's gonna be a fit for everybody, right? So if you're at that point where you want to have a family, then we should have areas that are designated for family. If you're a college student, you're going to go to college, and you got to go through a 4-year college. It's very expensive to go to college. I mean, obviously we've told our kids go to college, work hard, and so everybody wants to go to college, but the housing is a definite issue. And so how do you make sure that you're going to college, you're paying for housing? Well, first of all, it's how much you're going to pay in rent and how much are you going to pay in condominiums. And so for me, as we move and we develop the city of Burien, we want to figure out, okay, do we have enough transit? Do we have enough bus transit? Do we have enough sound transit? Do we, what kind of transit do we have? Bike lanes, the ability for Ubers and, most of these new ways of getting around, right? So for me, it's important to see, okay, well, what does it look like? And then when it comes to the first level, I do agree that, most of these buildings should have first level, so it's retail, right? Because the reality is obviously, who wants to live on a first level? So that's kind of where, so that's what we got going on with that. I believe that for me, it's extremely important that when we are thinking about housing, yes, can we go higher than what we're saying we can go? What is the limitations? What's limiting the ability to go up? We get one chance at this, and this is the time that we're putting a 20-year plan together and we're doing zoning code changes. So I agree with most of the comments that were made today. Obviously, as we move as a society away from gas and carbon footprints, to me, it's important that we look at also our transportation system. Thank you.